Hey guys and gals, come join me on my journey creating a DIY track saw crosscut table like you've never seen before. Say hello to the Springboard table. Here's some of the features of the Springboard. That's right, no picking up that saw between cuts. A fence that supports the material on both sides of the saw. The track is always square without clamping thanks to those springs. It easily folds to save space in your shop. It's got a removable saw rest with a backstop on it. Dust is no problem with this system. There's transport handles on both sides for your convenience. It's got power cable and vacuum hose management. It easily rolls with no engaging or disengaging of casters. It's got heavy-duty production stops for repeatable, accurate cuts. And it's got a 36-inch crosscut depth capacity. Now let me tell you why I had to build it. Well, I've got a big project coming up this spring. I promised my wife I would upgrade her walk-in closet. For 20 years now, she's been using plastic Sterlite dressers, and the first thing I want to do is get some equipment so I can cut Baltic birch without ruining it. You know, this stuff is expensive, and back when I was working, I did buy a Festool T75 track saw and a couple of tracks, but you know, that's all I've got, and I'm going to need more than that if I'm not going to ruin some of this Baltic birch. I'm going to need a rail square at minimum. I know I'm going to need some type of a MFT table to cut this stuff square. Actually, I think I want two of these put together. I saw one woodworker who actually had three put together because they are a little bit undersized. So the other thing I'm going to need is a high quality fence and stop system, and TSO is about as good as it gets. I'm also going to need a hinge system for my track because, well, that's what everybody has now that wants to make it a little bit easier, so we're going to need one of those. I definitely want cable and hose management. I don't want to be holding on to the hose and the cord with one hand. I want to be careful and accurate when I'm cutting this Baltic birch. I'm also going to buy a TSO parallel guide system, so when I'm doing those initial rips before they go to the table, I want that to be accurate too. And I did not expect the total to be quite as large. $3,157.85 for all those. I'm going to have to sleep on this for a while, but I'm sure I can come up with the money and talk to my wife about this, and you know, we can get the job done once she okays the project. Yeah, right. She's going to let me spend over $3,000 before we even buy the plywood. I might as well throw in another $20,000 for the divorce attorney, because that's what she's going to do with me. She's going to drop me like a bad habit. So what do? You know, what are my choices? I'm retired. I'm living on Social Security. How am I going to get this done without ruining this Baltic birch? DIY, that's how. I want to make this DIY crosscut table better than what the manufacturers can deliver. So let's get started. I packed a lot of features into this table, and one side effect to all those features was weight. I knew I needed to have space in my shop. I work in my garage like many of you, but this thing got heavier and heavier by the minute, so I knew it was going to have casters too. I also want to say too that I'm not going to show you every step on how to build this table. We'd be here for a long time. It took me over 2 months to engineer and to build this, but what I am going to do for you is put every detailed blueprint and set of plans for every part and every feature of this table up on my Google Drive. All you have to do is look at the information section and you'll find the link there, or just go to the comments section and you'll find a link there for all of the instructions and plans. You're also going to find all of the links for Amazon and Home Depot to get this job done. What I'm going to do now is take you through all those features, and you might decide to build a whole table. You may only want to take a couple of the ideas I had for some of the features, and feel free to get to that Google Drive and start building it for your table. So let's get started with the features on the Springboard. I wanted to show you the reason I think that this system is superior to a hinge system. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there with hinges, and just hear me out on this. With my system, you can leave this saw, and I use a T75. This thing weighs like 13 and a half pounds. If I told you that every time you use a table saw, you've got to pick up the motor and bring it to the table, you'd say, what? But for some reason, it doesn't bother people to have to move this heavy saw. I know this next project I have coming up, I'm going to be making hundreds of cuts. I don't want to have to move this. So instead of a hinge, what I've got is a fulcrum. I get done with my cut, and I place this piece of sacrificial wood down at the end, all right? And I put the saw, right over the middle of it. So now I get done, and I cut my piece, and I put my lift on there, and that block acts as a fulcrum, not a hinge, and I can put my piece in. This feature is the track lift, and keep in mind my Festool track saw is on the track right now, and the springs are engaged, so there's a lot of time saved there. You can just leave your saw on the track. It's at the other end of the table, and once we're done making our cut, these boards represent the product being cut. Keep in mind that when you go to cut anything, you have to have some sacrificial pieces on the table where there is no product, and you also have to attach one to the back of this this backstop here too. That way everything is the perfect level, and you have to do that with every type of product you cut, whether it's 1/4 inch or 3/4 or 1 inch. So we're done with the cut, and now all we have to do is push the saw forward. We're going to grab our track. This is a stop. This prevents us from pulling so hard that the track comes out of its enclosure here, because that's all we have to do is raise it this high. We lift it, we go ahead, move the block over, take our product out. We got tons of room here. We slide in our new product. It goes against our stop, and we drop it down, and we're ready to make the next cut. And you do it all over again. Take your product out, put new product in, and rinse and repeat. That is the track lift. Let's talk about the heart and soul of the Springboard, and that's the springs. The first thing you notice is I have 2 springs on each spring latching device. There's 2 of these devices. There's one right near the fence, and then there's one on the other side of the table near the stop that's farthest away from me. And the reason I wanted 2 was originally my intention was not to have too much tension on these springs. Now, these particular springs deliver 6.9 pounds of pull if you pull the spring open 1 inch. And that was a little too much for me. And I thought, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll just cut one of the springs in half. And it doesn't work that way. These are tension springs. And if you cut a spring in half with a tension spring, all it does is double the tension. So the way it works is if you put 2 tension springs together in parallel that have the same spring rate, you reduce the spring tension by 50%. So that's the reason there's 2 on there instead of 1. So it's all about having enough tension to keep the tracks against the stop, but only about 3 or 4 pounds of tension, and this did the trick. This latch from Amazon also came with this part, because the original intention was for this bar to go onto this latch and close whatever you're going to close, toolbox or wooden box you made or whatever. And this worked out great. The holes were big enough to put the spring in, and I had another hole here, and all I had to do was remove one of the track bar M6 nuts and put one of those in. This is M6 by 9 millimeters long, I believe. And that worked out great as far as holding my spring. I wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you guys about story sticks. Now, story sticks have been around for decades. Back in the day when craftsmen would make furniture, all their workers weren't running around with tape measures. They'd end up with 100 different measurements with 100 different people. They'd make jigs or story sticks to determine what length they needed for the part they were responsible for making. Now, if you noticed on my track stop kit, there's no stick-on digital readout where I can run that back and forth to the measurement that I want. And I don't want that. I personally think that you could be off. You could maybe pick the wrong number. You know, maybe you've got in your brain 21 and a half and it's 23 and a half you need or whatever. So the story stick will not fail you. And I'm going to show you how it works. Now, I had to modify this story stick a little bit. You know, in the past, story sticks might just be lines, and they would have to cut a piece and then make sure it lined up the line. Well, I think this system is a little bit more foolproof than that on a track saw anyway. So I know I'm going to be needing some cross cuts at 15 inches. So what I have to do is I have to go over here and I'm going to lift my track and put my track lift in. Now I'm going to take that story stick and I'm going to slide it in, and let's drop the track down now and make sure it's against the fence and it's flush, and go ahead and while holding it against the track, I'm going to go over here, I'm going to grab my production stop, I'm going to slide it over, and really what I should do is probably take advantage of this other Kreg stop here and put it against my story stick so it doesn't move, because I don't have three hands. Okay, so now that's not moving against the track and it's right up against the splinter guard. And then we take their production stop and I hold that and I get that all tightened down. And now I can go ahead and I can take out that story stick, and I know for a fact that I'm going to get 15-inch cuts exactly. You know, there's just no doubt about it. And if I come back to making that cross cut a month from now, that piece is going to be the same exact length. And that's what I love about these story sticks. Now, when I was making this, these parts are actually going to be for drawers. But I thought, you know, wouldn't it be neat if I could put my other measurement on the stick too? But I had a problem. You know, my track, I forget how wide a festival track is, but let's say it's 7.5. I'm not sure what it is. And the problem is when I put a small block on the story stick, I could not, you know, the space between wasn't big enough for the track to go between. So I thought, well, I'll just have to make two story sticks. Well, I started to think about it a little bit, and I thought, well, I know what I can do here. I can make a two-story story stick, if that makes any sense. But what I did was before I only had this one little block here, and what I did was I put my block for 23.5. I cut a filler piece. You know, these are all glued in, and you can see that I've got pin nailer on all of these. And what I did was I created a two-story story stick. So now all I have to do is slide this in under the track, and the track is going to rest on this surface and hit the 23.5. And it worked out perfect. So now when I'm going to make my drawer parts, I only have to reach for one story stick. Is that a big deal? No, it is for me. It's one less story stick I have to make, and I always make sure that I've got some type of a hole and I can hang this either on a nail or whatever you prefer. But you know, you hold on this, and if you know you're going to be making more drawers, you just pull out that story stick and you're good to go. I'm going to show you here how to use the other dimension on there and how it's going to rest on here. All right, to use that 23.5-inch end of the story stick, same thing, you know, we have to lift our track up and put our track lift in and go ahead and slide this underneath, go right on past the 15. we can drop our track down now. And once it's on there, we're going to push that up against the splinter guard until it's touching it. Let's make sure we're up against our fence. Okay, we were off our fence a little bit. All right, we're on our fence, we're on our splinter guard, and I'll put my third hand in effect here and use this other Kreg stop. And yep, that's right up against it. Now all we got to do is come down here, get our stop against it, tighten it down, and we are done. We are ready to make 23.5-inch cuts. And I made sure that when I cut these blocks out, you know, first of all, I was using a 1/2-inch thick stock. And I believe these are, yeah, I was going to say these are a hair over 1 inch. So that works good for me, and especially in the case of a double decker. We don't want to go too high because we can only raise our track up so high. So, and then like I said, glue it, pin nail it. Now I will say that when I am gluing these together, I do not use clamps because I want a good glue joint. I'm not only going to glue the stick I'm going to put that block on, but I'm also going to glue the block too. Well, when you're using clamps, it just wants to slip all over. So here's a pic where it shows how I did it. I use these lead ingots that I have, and I know you probably don't have those, but you can use anything that's heavy. You could use a brick, you could use a stone, but it works good for me. I can set the weights on there, and I can slowly move it back and forth to my witness lines and make sure it's perfect, make sure it's right on the edge. The other thing I will mention too is when you start out, you know, you're going to have some extra hardwood in the shop, you always do. Make sure that you go ahead and put these on the joiner and the planers so they're dead flat, because if you don't, they're going to rock on your fence, and that's no good. So make sure they're straight as an arrow, then go ahead and glue them up and pin nail them, and you'll have them for a lifetime. That's it for the story stick. I knew when I built the saw sport, it had to have a couple qualifications. First of all, it had to be strong. Second of all, it had to have a backstop. And I fashioned this out of a really cheap dollar store cutting board. And the other thing it had to have was easy installation and removal. And all I have to do is go ahead and put your saw forward, and there's a small knob underneath, and we turn that, and it comes right out. So that met all of my qualifications. What I did was I took a T-track bolt, and I used a Forstner bit on the top of the table, and I drilled down just far enough for the top of the T-track, that oval, to be below the deck. And then I ran some epoxy in there to keep dust out of there. But that is my saw rest, and that's how I made it. The purpose of this block is to kind of keep my table together in case I do something dumb and have my depth set a little too low. It's going to hold my MDF together, and it's easily replaceable. You can also see the knob here for getting rid of my saw support, and this easily pulls out. And that block also acts as a guide to make sure I'm up against it. The other thing I've got here too is this is a stop lock, and this only allows me to rotate the table in one direction when I'm closing it. The next feature I wanted to talk to you about was cable and hose management. Now, I knew when I started cutting hundreds of cuts on this springboard table, I did not want to have that hose and that power cable in my hand. You know, there's a reason why this thing has two handles, because they want two hands on that saw. So what I did was I first came up with an idea with a spring that was way underpowered, and the cable and hose would just lop right over. So what I ended up going with is two CB radio springs put together. I actually had too stiff of a spring by having one. By adding two in parallel, it made it half the power, and it was just right as far as, you know, how much it would bend, and it was perfect. So the other component to this is just a dowel, the bolt from this CB radio spring. is epoxied up in here. I cut the head off. That's a 3/8 hole. And then this driveway marker made of fiberglass, really tough. I use CA glue on that. That's a 5/16 hole. And the same thing with up here. This smaller dowel is 5/16 hole, CA glue for that. And then this is just plastic pipe strap. That's about 11 inches worth of that. And on the top, I've got a little 1/2-inch tapered screw in there. So, and this works out great, you know. That's one less thing I have to worry about. I do have to admit that just for safety's sake, I put a piece of duct tape on here, and that really helps hold it down. So maybe a Festool hose. This is not a Festool, but it's a pretty good hose. But I wouldn't want that popping out in the middle of a cut. So I put a piece of tape on there, no harm, no foul. And that's it. That's my cable and hose management, and I hope you like it. And it works pretty good. I can show you what happens when we're going down the table here, but it's got plenty of flex, and it works for me. You know, there it is, fully extended, and it doesn't bend that much, but, you know, bends just enough and keeps everything taut and keeps it out of your way, especially when you're going to load that next sheet. So there it is, and I hope you enjoy that feature. I also wanted to show you on my power cable and hose management, this CB radio goes into that 24 pitch thread bolt. And just so I didn't have to fumble around with things every time I put it together, I epoxied this 2.5-inch bolt through the bottom of the table, and that makes life a little easier for me. Let's talk about a couple more features here. First of all, we've got the lift at both ends. It really makes this table easy to move. And also I wanted to talk about the casters. Now, these are Harbor Freight casters that have been modified, but they will not move if this table is sitting on the floor. There's space there. And as soon as I lift up the table at either end, a little bit more than 1 inch or 2, I'm able to roll it. And that's just what I want. I didn't want this thing to be unstable and have it rolling around on me before I can flip my legs down. So I can show you another quick video here on how I modified those casters to work in my situation. The other thing I want to talk about too is when I put these hinges on, these were an inexpensive hinge from Home Depot, and each had 3 screws. And when I went to move it the first few times, I noticed I was getting a little bit of give to it. So what I did was drill 2 more holes here and 2 more here, and I drilled them in such a way where the screws wouldn't interfere with each other when I close it. And then I put 1.5-inch hardwood Kreg screws on here, and after I did this, this thing was solid as a rock. So I had to modify those hinges a little bit too, but it was worth it. All right, the next feature I want to talk about is the caster feature. I think they're unique because they don't have to be engaged and they don't have to be locked or disengaged when you're done. And what we have here are some Harbor Freight casters. Now, I did have to modify them. The tabs where the holes are had to go in my case. So I'm going to show you in a little clip how I got rid of those pretty quickly. And once I got rid of them, we were off to the races to get these things installed. The way these springboard casters work is when my springboard is folded and in storage and it's sitting at rest on its transport legs, there's going to be space between the caster and the floor, and that has to be 1/16 of an inch. So in order to figure that out, I just took some hardwood stock and I took some Irwin quick clamps and put them over the top of the caster while the caster was also temporarily clamped. And once I got the space I wanted and I knew my brackets were, perpendicular to the transport, feet, once I got that measurement, then I took a pencil and I marked at least 3 of my holes. The fourth one's probably covered by the quick clamp. And once I've got that, I can go ahead and remove the clamp, and I can go ahead and I use a prick punch and pre-drill. I don't want my screw heads being crooked. I want them being flat to the metal for strength. So go ahead and put a screw in and then line up your other witness marks that you made and mark that fourth and final and pre-drill them out and put your screws in and you'll be good to go. Here's another tip I wanted to share with you. On these hinges, when I got done installing them, a couple of the legs just seemed a little bit of play after they were locked. You can see this one locked and there's no play. Well, the reason there's no play now is I took some of that ultimate Gorilla tape, put 2 pieces, and that solved my problem. The other thing you have to remember too is these hinges, by the way, I'm very impressed with them for the money, very heavy duty. I like the locking and unlocking mechanism. You have to make sure you glue and screw some hardwood to the bottom of the MDF. It's the only way they're going to stay on there correctly. I wanted to show you a little trick on connecting these Bulldog clamps. What I did was I realized that these clamps, only one portion of it moves. So that means this pipe has to go over this surface here. Well, to do that, it's got to go up in the air a little bit. Well, thank God there is a little bit of play in these hinges when they're unlocked. So what I did is I made sure that the play, I was pushing down on the play. I connected the Bulldog clamp, I pushed it against the wood, and then I marked my holes with my pencil and put the screws in. And by doing so, I know that when it goes to go over this little ramp, it's going to be able to go up in the air a little bit. If I had my play going the wrong way, it would be putting a lot of force on the hinge, and by doing it that way, it worked out pretty good. All screws and bolts are epoxied on the top as well, so they won't collect any bit of sawdust while I'm working. All right, let's talk about legs. I like to call my legs pirate legs for obvious reasons. The other reason I wanted to make them this design was I knew I was going to have leg levelers, and if I had wood which was much thicker, it would be hard to get my fingers underneath to adjust the levelers, and I didn't want to have to do a low crawl to do that. So I went with the pipe and hardwood combination so it would keep it slender down there. So what we have here is an 8-inch piece of hardwood. I think these 4 are 2 inches by 1 3/4 by 8 inches long. And then go into Home Depot, order 10-foot 3/4 inch black pipe, and have them cut you up 4 sections at 26 inches, and you only need 1 end threaded, so remember that, save the old timer some work. And once you've got that, it's a matter of putting some tape on. It's all in the instructions and the plans, but what I did was the outside diameter of a 3/4 inch pipe is a little less than 1 1/8, and the only way I could get the wiggle out of the pipe was to put a little bit of duct tape strips, because I did have to allow enough room for the epoxy to push up through. I was going to pour that first with a cup. I think I used 30 milliliters, and pour that into the hole first, then take the pipe and push it in. And there's a little bit of resistance, but it goes right by that tape, and you'll see that in the plans. And once you've got that, it's just a matter of letting it cure. Now, keep in mind, this is not 5-minute epoxy. This is casting epoxy. And I've got links for all that in the Amazon links too. But the key here is to, first of all, we don't want to mess. So if you got some aluminum wrapped around it, go at least a couple laps, then get all those wrinkles out with your fingers. Otherwise, that epoxy will leak and you'll come back an hour later and see all your epoxy on the deck. So once you've done that, though, it's a matter of keeping it warm. Now, if you cannot maintain 70 to 80 degrees constantly for 24 hours, you're going to be in a situation that I had. So what I did was I created a tent over the legs, and I used a cheap dehydrator in there, monitored the temperature, and I got it up over 70 and I was fine. And don't get tempted to sneak in there and look at it at the halfway point. You need 24 to cure it properly. And once they were done, I ripped off that tape, did a little bit of sanding on some leaks in the wrinkles and cleaned that up. And then I took a file and touched off the epoxy where it was a little bit of jagged on the aluminum tape. And, they came out good, I think. And they're very strong if you use that type of epoxy. After the table's in its upright position, I use these bolts to lock it down. I even super glued the washer on there so I wouldn't be fumbling with that. And I printed this on my 3D printer just so it's a little easier to grab and I don't need any wrenches. I also incorporated a little lock so this can't accidentally open when I'm transporting it. Here's the feature I love the most about this Kreg Precision Track and Stop Kit. This is your production stop. And if you looked at what other companies have to offer, they're very flimsy. They usually have a very small piece of metal that flips over. And this thing is probably the toughest production stop I've ever seen. I mean, it is big, it is strong, it is going nowhere. They really spent some time when they made this extrusion here. This thing is built for production, and this is what you want to use when you're sliding in your plywood. I can't imagine banging into this and having it move at all. There's no way. The table would probably move, and I don't think you could say that for its competitors. The Kreg kit comes with two stops. You've got your production stop, which doesn't flip up like this one does, but this is kind of handy. Let's say once in a while you've got to make some thin cuts right next to the splinter guard. Well, we could use this one and, it easily adjusts back and forth, and when you're not using it, you just flip it out of the way. I wanted to quickly show you guys and gals how I went about actually getting that perfectly square line from this track stop to this track stop. And obviously what we're shooting for is perfectly perpendicular 90 degrees from our fences. So the first thing I did was I had to glue up my fences and screw them from the bottom after the glue cured. And for my straight edge, I use my Festool track. Now, if that's not straight enough for you, we got bigger problems. So let's say that's done, that's cured, dried, we've got the screws in. We know we've got one surface that's perfect. So now what we have to do is we got to try to get that perpendicular line on there. Well, what do? I don't have an expensive TSO square, but I've had a steel square that I've been using for decades, and it helped me build a house, and it's never failed me. But you say, well, okay, I can go buy a carpenter square or whatever, but how do I know the square is square? Well, the easiest way to determine if a square is square that's not going to involve the 3-4-5 method is you, in my case, I took some of these shipping labels and I stuck them to the table. That feed and wax made by Howard did such a good job. Nothing wanted to stick to it like tape, but these are managing to stick, but they'll come off. So now you take your square and you need a good straight edge here. So what I wanted to do was I used a level, and after I got the level on the table, I clamped it at both ends. Let me move my camera just a little bit so I can show you this a little bit better. There we go. So I've got this clamped down. This does not matter if this is crooked a little bit. It doesn't matter. It's all relative. And then just put your stickers or piece of paper. The stickers work out good because they don't pop up like paper would, and you have to tape the paper down. But get that down, and now you're going to take your trusty square and you're going to drop it on here, and you're going to make sure your pencil's nice and sharp, and you're going to do one line. Don't try to do two. It's just going to mess it up. Trust me, I know. And once you get your line, now what you want to do is take your square and you're going to flip it. And you're going to use the same surface, but it's flipped. And what I like to do that gives me a good visual representation of it being squares, I'll get my my square almost to the other line, and then I'll do my second line and make sure you're obviously up against your, your fence perfectly. And when you're done, let me get you a little closer now. When you're done, you're going to end up with two lines. And if you have a good square, they're going to be perfectly parallel. They're not going to be touching each other. God forbid those two lines are getting wider or narrower when you get done. Well, you need to go buy a new square and then come home and try the same thing. So we verified that our square is good. Is it a TSO? No. But square is square. And the bigger the square, the better. We wouldn't want to do this with a 6-inch square or anything. So now we know we've got a good line here because we trusted Festool on that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to line this up, and we're going to put our track in. Let me grab our track. Let's go ahead and put our track. Keep in mind that we don't even have that fence down there, that track stop built yet. That is not there. All we're going to do is make a line. So what we're going to do is we're going to push our Festool track up against this stop, which is built. Now, when I get done, I'm going to have a thin layer of felt on here to protect my Festool track. But I really need this to be metal right now because it has to be perfect. So then what we do is we just put our square, which we know is good, and we know our line here is good, and we just keep playing with this until the sticker, of course, is going to give me a hard time when I don't want it to. So, all right, so we've got this tight. You're holding that tight as you can, and then you move your track around until we got to move it out farther. And the other thing I want to tell you about too, when you're using your tracks, it's really easy to drop a track and get a little bit of a dimple or a dent here. And it's a good idea to take a file of that. I had one at the other end that was pretty bad, and that way you're not getting any interference. So we get our track on there, and we get it aligned with our square. And once we're happy, make sure that foam on the bottom of the track is clean. That'll give you lots of grip. And once you're happy with that, okay, and that square, you're getting no wiggle, you're going to each side, you're pushing, you're not getting any clicking, you know that you are perfectly touching this. Now you can remove this and go ahead and grab your trusty number 2 and give yourself a single line all the way. Don't try to do a double. You'll just make it wider and it'll be less accurate. And then now you can go ahead and build that other track stop and make sure that the metal portion of that track stop is touching that line exactly. And that's another advantage of having a bigger table, because by having a bigger table, it's like having a bigger 3-4-5 square. And it's just going to give you perfect results. So that's how I went about it. And then when I got done, and I could then take and measure out 3-4-5 dimensions for here along the rail and then on my diagonal just to verify, but I knew it was good, but I did it anyways because I was curious to see the results, and it was all perfect. But the 345 is great for verification, but it sure doesn't help you when it comes to building it. You need something square to begin with, and this is what I used. If you have a TSO, God bless you, but I do not. And like I said, square is square. And there are many good woodworkers out there who create their own squares, but you have to start somewhere. You have to have something that's square to begin with, and that's how I did it. So I just know that some of you who have never had to build a crosscut table like this were wondering how the heck did I end up with those accurate lines, and that's how I did it. Let's move on. I decided to change my first attempt at protecting my tracks from the metal on the track stops with felt. The first adhesive strips were a bit too thick due to the foam on the adhesive. I replaced that with adhesive-backed felt without the foam, and that did the trick. I was able to cut the felt to the exact width I needed by just taking my combo square and removing the metal and using that as a template, and ran my Stanley knife blade along that, and it worked out perfect. So let's go ahead and start making this ripping square. This is my alternative to parallel guides. And the first thing we have to do is make this marking guide. These square stops, you want to open them up, put them on the square, and you want to use a combination square. And make sure those two are directly across from each other with a combination square, which should be pretty easy. And once you do that, just tighten them while you're squeezing them a little bit with your fingers. Don't horse them down. Just hold them lightly with your fingers and tighten those down. After we do that, we're going to take that piece of polycarbonate that you've cut to a size of 2 1/4 inches wide by 5 inches long. And I did that on the bandsaw. It cut like butter. Go ahead and use that combo square again. Now put that piece of polycarbonate on there as squared as you can get it. And once you've affirmed that with your combo square, you can go ahead, hold it lightly, and use a fine permanent marker and make the outline of the square stops on there. And once you've done that, flip it over and use a Stanley knife to score it, and that way we're going to have a real good epoxy bond. Next thing you want to do is do the same scoring on the bottom of the square stops. Go ahead and epoxy that up with 5-minute epoxy. Let it cure at least for a day before you mess with it. And if for some reason those square stops were a little too tight, or who knows, that sheetrock square might be a little wider, you know, we could always drop a file in there and give it a couple rubs until we get minimum clearance and no binds. That's what we're shooting for. Let's move on to the next part of it. Now, I did find it was advantageous to add something to the end of this sheetrock square to keep it parallel to the deck when we're doing our operations, because just the polycarbonate and the locks on there raise it up. So what I did was this is a rubber guide. I've got all the links on Amazon for this, but this is like a rubber tipped threaded bolt that would be on a woodworking lockdown device. And we're going to put that in, and then we're going to double nut it on the other end. And once we do that, we're going to cut off the excess bolt and file it down smooth. And then I put, I don't know, just 4 or 5 drops of epoxy and let that cure overnight. And that way, if I flip it over and I've got expensive plywood, I'm not damaging this thing with that double nut. So that's the reason for the epoxy on that. All right, let's move on. Now we have to take those screws out of the marking guide, and I don't like the way they are from the factory. If you look at the close-up here, this bolt has a definite circle that goes around, and you know, this is going to leave bad marks on our aluminum sheetrock square. So what we need to do is just get a Dremel out or a grinder, whatever you have. I love the Dremels, the sanding drum on that, and I sanded it down with that. And once I got it as smooth as I could get it, then I took some 600 grit with some water and polished it up a little bit. And now we can tighten it down as tight as we want. We're not going to damage our ripping square. So that was the purpose of doing those. All right, so we've made our marking guide for our ripping square, and we're slowly transforming this sheetrock square into something we can use for ripping sheet goods. But we got some more mods to do. What we have to do is we have to remove part of it. By nature, these sheetrock squares are longer on one end. So what we're going to do is take a combo square and figure the exact length of this section, and then we're going to make this one equal to it and remove a piece. So once you get done there, just do some file work and make sure you don't have any sharp edges. And the other thing we have to do is we have to increase this little fence it has. That is not going to be big enough, you know, right there. It just isn't. I'll show you why. What we're going to do is we're going to epoxy this piece of aluminum angle. And when you go to buy your aluminum angle, make sure you don't buy angle that's rounded in the corner. And here's some here, and it's not going to work out good for you because it's not going to fit snug to the corner of the sheet. What you want is you want angle that is truly a 90 in the corner. So once you cut that to size to be the same length as that, now what we're going to have to do is we have to figure out where we're going to epoxy this in. The way this thing is going to sit is it's going to be underneath here, and let me flip it up. All right, so it's going to be like this. Trying to do this one-handed here, and let's get a little focus going on here. So that's what it's going to look like once it's all epoxied in. But we want to make sure that we have a good epoxy adhesion. So what I did was I went on the underside with an orbital, and then I took a Stanley knife and made some crisscross designs there. I also made crisscrosses on the underside of the original fence. You can see them there. And then on my angle iron, I did the same thing. I had crisscrosses on there, and this is going to deliver a really good epoxy job, and we don't have to worry about it falling off. I didn't want to use screws on this. I didn't want anything interfering with this angle iron touching the sheet goods. And I want to show you why we need to add this extra bigger fence. First of all, you can see, you know, the original one is just too small. We want something at least as wide as the sheetrock, but the other reason we need it is when we go to run our square, you know, let's loosen these up. Let's say we had some really narrow rips we were going to do. And the way this is built, the closer I get to the edge, the more it raises up my my sheetrock square will not once come right over the edge. So, and that's why we had to do a little bit better job of improving the fence on the sheetrock square. Now it doesn't matter how close we get with that marking guide, you know, we're still going to have good contact. And, you know, while we're talking about this ripping square, you know, you say, well, geez, Jim, why didn't you just buy some parallel guides? Well, to be honest with you, the biggest reason I don't like parallel guides is, first of all, you have to synchronize both of them. There's two of them. And this is just going to be one ripping square. You're going to use the same square to make a mark on your plywood at one end and then on the other. And it really doesn't matter if this square isn't perfectly square because it's all relative, you know. You're going to get the same exact distance when you make your marks. And you say, well, geez, you know, that takes longer. The ripping square is a little, or the parallel guides are a little quicker. Well, I don't think they are. They're not, the parallel guides don't give me any feedback. I push them up against the product, and yeah, you know, I synchronized them, and I think I did a good job there. But when I go to actually make my cut, if I were to, you know, bump it just a hair, I'm off the mark. You know, your track, let's say on your track saw, is dusty. And with mine, I'm going to have my splinter guard right up to the lines I created on my Baltic birch. It's going to cost me $110 a sheet. I don't mind spending an extra few seconds making the mark. Now I've got visual feedback that I'm on my marks, because I am going to clamp it. I'm going to clamp my track down, and you know, you don't do as many rips as crosscuts, so big deal. You spend a little more time, you mark it, and we're going to end up saving over $300 versus buying some high quality parallel guides, and they won't be hanging off the track. They won't be in our way, and this is going to give us the best results. No synchronization needed between the left and right parallel guides. So that's my thought behind this. And, you know, my biggest motivation is self-serving. It's going to cost me less. So let's go ahead and get this epoxied up, and we're just about done with this ripping square. Well, the ripping square is done, and I'm super happy with it. That improvement on the fence really helped it. And keep in mind, when I go to use this, I'm not going to use a tape measure to measure out the length of my rips that I need. I'm going to create story sticks, and I'll keep those story sticks throughout the project. I'll have a different story stick for every rip that I do. That way, if I have to change gears and do another rip, I can use the story stick and bring my marking guide exactly to it. It'll have a wooden stop on it, and my cuts will be perfect. Never again will I have to worry about tape measure reading being the same that I took a month before. When I finished my springboard table, I knew I had to seal it to protect it from humidity, warping, and glue spills. And I really didn't want to use shellac due to the smell. I was building this in my basement, and I did not want to hear someone saying, "Jim Brown, what is that smell in my house?" So I decided on a product called Feed and Wax by Howard. This stuff worked great. It's easy to apply and has a very pleasant citrus smell. I did the bottom first after disassembling the MDF from the transport legs by pulling the nuts off of the 4 taper head bolts that are epoxied into the MDF. I used some blocks of wood to support the top while unbolting. This stuff has so much wax in it, you need to put the sealed bottle in a bowl of hot tap water for about 20 minutes and then give it a good shake afterwards. It only took about 3/4 of a bottle, and I liked it so much I put it on the cherry table I built. Well, the story stick for the ripping square is done. I think it came out good. I used all hardwood, it was all straight, and then I glued and pin nailed to a piece of 1/2-inch plywood for support. That way, if I drop this thing, you know, without that support, it might break that tee off. It's glued, but just pin nailed. So, and when I go to put my stops on, I'm going to make sure that I use my combo square and make sure they're really squared up good before I glue them and pin nail them. And this is how it's going to work. You know, this is a 17-inch rip, and I made sure I spent time measuring exactly from the outside this piece of hardwood all the way over to my line. I like putting the arrow on here just so it lines up with the arrow on the marking guide. And, you know, this is square and this is square because you're going to push your marking guide. You're going to loosen your little bolts on your square stops, and you're going to push it up against this so it's perfectly flush, and then tighten them down. And now all you got to do is go over to your sheet and mark it up. And it's going to be 17 inches perfectly. And there's plenty of room on this thing for more, you know. You can put them on here. Obviously, you got to have a little bit of space between them so you can fit in your marking guide. You know, you wouldn't want 2 blocks right next to each other. So there may be a need to create a second story stick if for some reason you had 2 rips that are really close to each other. But I cut a couple more because I know I'm going to be able to have at least 3 to 4 rips on this before I run out of room. And I'm pretty happy with it. Like I said, I made sure everything was nice and straight before I went and did my work. And that's how that's going to work. And we should have some nice accurate rips with our new ripping square. Okay, guys and gals, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video and letting me take you back in time to the days where woodworkers not only made their own furniture, but made their own tools. What I wouldn't give to go back in time and work with those craftsmen. Imagine the tricks they could teach us.